We are very glad that you are here today. We're getting ready to begin. So, welcome to the 32nd anniversary of the Miami Book Fair. I'm Dr. Kim McGinnis, a volunteer room host, and we're delighted to have you here this morning. If you look through the schedule of events today, you'll see that there are many venues of author sessions running today and throughout the entire weekend, plus activities in Children's Alley and programs in the Swamp and in the Porch and more. Please consider becoming a member of the Friends of the Book Fair. Your charitable contribution will support this wonderful book fair. Friends receive multiple benefits such as preferential seating and admission to special book fair events. We greatly appreciate our friends. This year, you can support the fair very easily. Just text BOOK to 501-501 to donate $10. You'll receive a text back asking to confirm your donation. Just reply yes. We're also grateful for our sponsors, including the Knight Foundation, OHL Areno, and the Bachelor Foundation, and so many more that are listed on signage throughout the fair. Miami Book Fair does not end today. It goes throughout the weekend. Miami Book Fair programs, events, and activities that take place throughout the year here and all over Miami happen as well. We're grateful to the college and hundreds of volunteers that make this possible. There will be a brief question and answer after the reading discussion, and the authors will also do autographing immediately following the session. Now, kindly silence your cell phones so there will be no interruptions. And here to introduce our very special guests, we have some members from the Greater Miami Lynx Incorporated. T. Robertson Carter and Dr. Rosalind Pascal will introduce Congressman John Lewis and Mr. Andrew Aydin. In addition, we have Heir o' Lynx, Ms. Kara Powell and Ms. Skylar Carter, who are going to do the introductions. So please welcome them.
Hi, good morning, everyone. How you doing today? All right, this is going to be good. All right, so thank you. Myself, on behalf of the Greater Miami chapter of the Lynx, members myself and Dr. Rosalind Pascal, and our Aero Lynx, which are daughters and future leaders of the Lynx. We have Kara Powell and Skylar Carter. We just want to welcome you again. Yay. So we have the pleasure this morning of first introducing the co-author of March, Book 1 and Book 2, Andrew Aydin. He is a comic book aficionado and was actually exposed very early on in his young life to a book about Martin Luther King that was a comic book, which inspired him later on in life to create a comic book with Congressman John Lewis about his story and history for all of you to enjoy. He is a #1 New York Times bestselling graphic memoir series recipient, award winner. He won the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award for special recognition and the Coretta Scott King Book Award for author in honor of, in March, Book 2. Lewis and his fellow freedom riders board a bus in the vicious heart of the Deep South, where they will be tested as they never were before. That's what you'll learn a little bit more about today. So now I'm going to pass it over to the Aero Lynx to do the introduction for Congressman John Lewis. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Aero Lynx Skylar Carter. We live in an age in which we have a near infinite vault of knowledge in which we can pull from our pockets. We live in an age in which the world is on speed dial. We live in an age in which the revolutionary is the norm, yet we live in an age in which history has forgotten itself. Civil rights, equality, police brutality, issues that seem so close, so recent, so personal, yet we forget they span decades. Black people today live on the grace of bones broken almost half a century ago. Yet even as we speak, the fight to live comfortably, to be heard, still continues. Never has the civil rights movement been so relevant. What Black people fight for now is the same as what Black people fought for then. And what better way to understand the present than to look to the past? There is no better person to educate through experience than Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights leader and activist throughout the decades. His name is plastered upon history books for his resilience and courage in combating the injustice surrounding the Black community. He bravely walked alongside the people of Salem on Bloody Sunday, joined in on the March on Washington, and endured lasting scars, all in the name of equality for African American people. Even today, he continues to aid the whole of America through his position in Congress. Through his struggle, through his place among history, we can better understand our own.
Thank you, Link Schuyler. I am Link Kara Powell. As a super senior at Barbara Goldman Senior High, reading in school has always been a top priority. I woke up this morning and said to myself, I'm going to miss school. That is something that unless I'm half dead, I am never allowed to do. But when the opportunity came to introduce an author who is my living history, I realized that I would be coming to get an education that surpasses textbooks. My mom said that if I ever wanted to achieve at something, I must do my homework. I Googled Congressman John Lewis and went out and bought the book. I needed to read more, research more, and learn more. A comic book, I thought to myself? I quickly understood that the form the information came in did not deter from the impact the graphic novel had on me. John Lewis's, along with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's leadership and courage, allowed the African American teens of today the rights that many take for granted. What makes him qualified to share this story, this battle with you? Today's author stands as the only living member of the Big Six. Along with such great men as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, A. Philip Randolph, Whitney Young, Jim Farmer, and Roy Wilkins, he met the President of the United States at the age of 23. And he was one of the few official speakers allowed during the March on Washington. So many times, we as young people don't feel we have a voice or that our reality is not important. But this book made me realize that while we can't change everyone, one action at a time can change the most unlikely of hearts and make a positive difference. Books should make you feel something. March Book 2 really made me feel that I can have a voice, that I must have a vote. It made me feel that we, the young leadership of tomorrow, can also wake up America, and I promise that I am filing out my voting card application today. So just think, on his 21st birthday, he spent the night in jail and endured evil treatment for his beliefs. Well, today is my 18th birthday, and there is nowhere that I would rather be than right here with today's featured author of March Book 2. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Oh, good morning. Good morning. I'm delighted, very happy, and very, very pleased to be here with my co-author, my friend, my staffer, my buddy, Andrew Aydin. Thank you. It is good to be here in Miami. It is good to be attending the Miami Book Fair once more. I want to thank you, kind young students, for that brilliant introduction. Now, you know, I didn't grow up in a big city, a beautiful city like Miami. I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But back in 1944, when you read March Book 1, you will discover that in 1944, when I was 4 years old, my father had saved $300. And with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. My family still owns this land today. On this farm, we raise a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. I know you're a beautiful, handsome group of young people, but you don't know anything about raising chickens. I know you're very smart. I know you're gifted, but you don't know anything about raising chicken. I know some of you like to eat chicken, right? Any of you know anything about raising chicken? Oh, don't play with me. Let me tell you what I had to do as a young boy. How many of you really know something about raising chicken? Why don't we compare notes here then? Oh, very good, very good. Well, when I was a little boy, when the setting hen was set, had to take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. Why marking those fresh eggs with a pencil? Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest, and there would be some more eggs. Had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. You follow me? You don't follow me? It's okay, it's all right. So when these little chicks would hatch, I would fool these setting hens. I would cheat on these setting hens. I would take these little chicks and give them to another hen. Or put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own. Get some more fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, encourage the setting hen to stay on the nest for another 3 weeks. I kept on fooling and cheating on these setting hens. And when I look back, it was not the right thing to do. It was not the moral thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most nonviolent thing to do. But I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive incubator or hatchery from the Sizzle Buck store. And you're so young and so smart and so gifted. You probably never heard of the Sizzle Buck store, the Sizzle Buck catalog. Maybe some of your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, maybe some of your teachers. It's a big book. It's a heavy book. It's a thick book. Some people call it the wish book. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. But as a little boy, about 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to preach the gospel. So with the help of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard like you're gathered here in this hall. And we would have church. My brothers and sisters and cousins would line the outside of the chicken yard. But the chicken would be very close to me. I started speaking or preaching. When I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But some of those chickens that I preached to in the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. And as a matter of fact, some of those chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. Well, that's enough of that story. When we visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. I asked my mother, asked my father, my grandparents why. They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. And sometime we'd be out there working in the field, picking cotton, gathering peanuts, pulling corn. And my mother would say, boy, you're falling behind. You need to catch up. And I would say, this is hard work. And she would say, hard work never killed anybody. I said, well, it's about to kill me. So one day in 1955, 15 years old in the 10th grade, I heard about Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on our radio. The action of Rosa Parks and the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to find a way to get in the way, to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. So in 1956, 16 years old, with some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we went down to the public library in the little town of Troy, Alabama, trying to get a library card, trying to check out some books. And we were told by the librarian that the library was for whites only and not for coloreds. I never went back to that library until July 5th, 1998, and by this time I'm in the Congress, for a book signing of my first book, Walking with the Wind. And hundreds of blacks and white citizens showed up for a book signing. After the program was over, they gave me a library card. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress we've made. In March, book 1, and now we have book 2. And next year, book 3 will be coming out. And Andrew would tell you how dramatic book 3 is going to be. I'm sorry that our illustrator is not here today. He's a gifted artist. He can draw. He can really draw. He make the words sing. And sometimes when we were signing books, and he's signing with us, he would draw a chicken. And the chicken is saying, amen. March, book 1, book 2, and book 3 will tell the story. Some of you may be asking, how did you get involved? How did you meet Martin Luther King Jr.? How did you meet Rosa Parks? But when I was only 17 years old, I wrote a letter to Dr. King. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters or brothers, any of my teachers. I wanted to attend a little college called Troy State College, only 10 miles from my home, now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the school. It didn't admit black students. So I sent this letter to Dr. King. He wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I'd been accepted at a little college in Nashville, Tennessee. An uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had, and gave me a Foot Locker, one of these big upright trunks. I put everything that I own, except those chickens, in that Foot Locker, and took a Greyhound bus to Nashville to study. And after being there for about 3 weeks, I told one of my teachers that I'd been in contact with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This teacher knew Dr. King. They both had studied together at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. So he informed Dr. King that I was there. Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, home in Alabama, I boarded a bus. I traveled to Montgomery, and a young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, who had been the lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King, and became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and during the march from Selma to Montgomery, met me and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery and ushered me into the office of the church. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. standing behind a desk. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I'm John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name, and he started calling me the boy from Troy. So I continued to study in Nashville because my folks, my mother and my father were so afraid that if we pursued my interest in attending that school, we could lose the land, our home could be burned or burned. So it was there that we started studying the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. As students, black and white college students, we'd be sitting in at lunch counters, in restaurants, And someone would come up and spit on us, put a lighted cigarette out in our hair or down our backs, pull us off the lunch counter stool, beat us. The first time I got arrested, Andrew would tell you, I felt free. I felt liberated. I felt like I crossed over. When I heard that I may be arrested, I wanted to be, Andrew, what is the word that the students in Virginia gave me? Right. I know as young people you use the word fresh. Well, I wanted to be what I called back then sharp, I guess. I wanted to have a new suit, but I couldn't afford it. So you know what I did? I went downtown Nashville to a used men's store and bought a suit. You know how much I paid for this suit? Now this is 1960. I paid $5. If I still had that suit today, I probably can sell it on eBay for a lot of money. But I went to jail, and I was charged with disorderly conduct. But I was so orderly and so peaceful. But because of what students did by sitting down or sitting in, we were standing up. In a matter of a few weeks, all of the stores in Nashville desegregated their lunch counters. And the signs that we saw throughout the city that said white and colored came down. Then we went on something called the Freedom Ride. Just think, in 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, black people and white people couldn't be seated together on a bus leaving Washington, D.C. to travel through Virginia, through North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. We were on our way to New Orleans to test a decision of the United States Supreme Court. We changed that. We were beaten. We were jailed. As a matter of fact, the first incident occurred in a little town called Rock Hill, South Carolina, about 30 miles from Charlotte, North Carolina. My seatmate was a young white gentleman. The two of us tried to enter a so-called white waiting room. We were attacked, beaten, and left lying in a pool of blood. The local police officials came up wanting to know whether we wanted to press charges. We said no. We come with peace. We come with love. We believe in the way of nonviolence. Many years later, one of the guys who beat us in his 70s came to my office in Washington with his son in his 40s in February '09 and said, Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the men that beat you. I'm one of the guys that beat you and your seatmate. I want to apologize. Will you forgive me? His son started crying. He started crying. I said, I forgive you. I accept your apology. They hugged me. I hugged them back. And the three of us cried together. That's the power of the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. You know, during the 60s, I was arrested not just 5 times, but 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, 5 more times. I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. So I said to you, and Marge is saying to you also, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something about it. In America, we have a right of freedom of assembly. We have a right to petition our government. I want to move on and just think about it. Now, many of you are going to be 18 very soon, right? Some of you already 18? But you look much younger. But just think a few short years ago, in many parts of America, young people 18 years old could not register to vote. We changed that. A few short years ago, people of color in many parts of our country could not register to vote, and we had to change that. When I spoke at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, in my speech, I said something like, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too. It must be ours." Back in the 60s, people were asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, to count the number of jelly beans in a jar. People stood in immovable lines. There were black lawyers and doctors, public school teachers, college professors who were told they could not read or write well enough. They failed the so-called literacy test, and we had to change that. How many of you saw the movie Selma? Do any of you recall seeing a young man playing me? Wearing a backpack? I was wearing a backpack on that bridge before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. And on that day, Sunday, March 7, 1965, in that backpack, I had 2 books. I thought we were going to be arrested and we were going to go to jail, so I wanted to have something to read. I had 1 apple and 1 orange. I wanted to have something to eat. Now, 1 apple and 1 orange wouldn't last that long. So I thought I was going to be in jail with my friends and colleagues and neighbors. Had toothpaste and toothbrush. 600 of us, many, many young people, young students, line up in twos to walk from Selma to Montgomery, to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people wanted to register to vote. We get to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. We come within hearing distance of the state troopers. A man spoke up and said, "This is an unlawful march, will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." Young man from Dr. King's organization by the name of Jose Williams said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And I said, "Major, may I have a word?" He said, "There will be no word." Troopers advance. You saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick, had a concussion at the bridge. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. But 50 years later, this past March 7th, I had an opportunity to go back across the bridge with 100 members of Congress, with President Obama and his family, with President Bush and his wife. And if someone had told me 50 years ago, on March 7, 1965, that one day I would be standing here as a member of the House of Representatives, been elected by the people of Georgia for almost 30 years, I would say, "You crazy? You're out of your mind? You don't know what you're talking about." So I said to you as young people, you must never, ever give up or give in. You must keep the faith, hold on to your dreams, and be what you want to be. Be what you want to be. You can be teachers, you can be lawyers, you can be a doctor, you can be a scientist, an engineer. You can be governor, mayor, president of the United States. Whatever you do, just do it well and go for it. So hang in there. Keep the faith. And I said to you, never hate. Hate is too heavy a burden to bear. The way of love is a much better way. We're one family. We're one people. We're one house. We all live in the same house, not just the American house, but the world house. Dr. King said on one occasion, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we'll perish as fools. The late Ethel Randolph, who was born in Jacksonville, Florida, who became a champion of civil rights and human rights. He was the dean of black leadership. He convened the March on Washington. He used to say over and over and over again, maybe our foremothers and forefathers all came to this great land in different ships, but we all are in the same boat now. We must look up each other and care for each other. So it doesn't matter whether we're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We're one people. Okay? Thank you very much. I want you to listen. I want you to listen to Andrew Aydin. The idea of March was his idea. Andrew.
How do you follow that? My name is Andrew Aydin. I serve as the Congressman's Digital Director and Policy Advisor in the Congressional Office, and I am the only congressional staffer with a graphic novel on the New York Times bestseller list right now. You guys got it? All right, where's the guy on the board? All right. So I'm from Atlanta. Congressman's been my congressman since I was 3 years old. It's a little surreal to be up here. I'm sure at some point, many of you guys asked yourself, why did John Lewis write a graphic novel? It's a fair question. It's my fault. It started in 2008. I was serving as the Congressman's press secretary on his re-election campaign. It was coming down to the end of it. It was the summer of hope and change. Barack Obama was sweeping through the Democratic primaries. Elected officials for the first time really believed that anything was possible, shocked to find that young people would actually vote. And so we're coming down to the end of the campaign, and folks are like, what are we going to do after? Some folks are going to go to the beach. Some folks are going to go see their parents. I said I was going to a comic book convention. And as you can imagine, all of these very stiff political folks laughed at me, except for one person, John Lewis. From the back of the room, I heard a deep voice. He said, don't laugh. There was a comic book during the Civil Rights Movement, and it was incredibly influential. That comic was called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. It sold for 10 cents. It was 16 pages, cover to cover. It was just a story of the Montgomery bus boycott. It was simple. But when he told me that it had played a meaningful role in the Civil Rights Movement, I was captivated. Finally, my little nerd niche was meaningful to the future of democracy in this country. So it sort of seemed self-evident to me. If this small comic that just told you the story of the bus boycotts could help inspire some of the earliest acts of civil disobedience, what if you took John Lewis's story? What if you took this human being who did so much, who led the sit-in movement, who participated and was an original freedom rider, who chaired SNCC, who helped lead the Mississippi Freedom Summer and ultimately led the march on Bloody Sunday? What if you took his story and you put it in a comic book form? It seemed self-evident to me. However, when I asked the congressman at first, he was very polite, and he said, well, maybe? Which, if you ever get a chance to work in politics, you will quickly find maybe is a nice way of saying no. But I didn't give up. It was right there. Here was this idea. Here was something that could work. Everything that was happening in this country, it seemed like nobody knew what was happening in the civil rights movement. I grew up in Atlanta. I didn't know about John Lewis. He was my congressman, but I didn't know what SNCC was. It wasn't until I worked for him, until I read his works, listened to his speeches, watched him talk to kids. And so I just kept asking, why don't you write a comic book? Every time I did, somebody on the staff would just, nerd. Well, let me tell you something. As I stand on this stage, if folks are laughing at you, you're probably doing something right. And so I kept asking, and I kept asking. And finally, by the end of that campaign, the congressman turned around to me after I asked one more time, and he said, okay, I'll do it, but only if you write it with me. And that moment changed my life. So how do you get from that moment in 2008 to August of 2013 when March Book 1 debuted at #1 on the New York Times? That was a long road. And if there's anything I want you all to take from it, it is that you have to work incredibly hard if you want to do something that you believe in. Because it's not easy. Congressman and I had jobs. I was working on his staff. He's a member of Congress. We had stuff that we needed to do. If you think homework is hard, try going to Congress every day and then going home at night and writing a book. We did that for 4 years. And at the same time, I was going to grad school at night at Georgetown. I went on to write my graduate thesis about Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story. I was captivated. Like, how did this come about, right? It was a proof of concept. If that worked once, how do we make that work again on a broad scale? Turns out, funny story, Dr. King actually helped edit Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story. You ever imagine Dr. King sitting down at his desk in 1957 poring over a comic book script? But that's what he did, because he too believed that you have to think outside the box. You have to be creative. You have to use different ideas to get your message out. And so John Lewis and I spent 4 years working at night, on weekends, all of our free time. Those stolen moments where you say, hey, you know, I have an idea. What if we do this scene like this? Everybody else thinking we're crazy. Everybody. One of those surreal moments came when we were on the pilgrimage, which is where Congressman Lewis leads members of Congress down to the South. He shows them the sights of the civil rights movement. They go to Alabama. And I get on the elevator, and holy something, there is Ethel Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's widow, and John Siegenthaler, who was Robert Kennedy's aide. And I get on this elevator, and I couldn't help myself. I go, excuse me. I just thought you might want to know. You're in a comic book that I'm working on with John Lewis. And Ethel Kennedy looks up at me with these big, beautiful eyes. She says, well, that's nice, dear. So you can understand what it meant to me when a few years later she called me on my cell phone to tell me that March Book 1 was the first graphic novel ever to win the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award. But that's just it. Your great ideas will be scoffed at first. People will not understand them. But it will be the measure of your hard work and your conviction that turns them into a reality that people then honor. Everybody thought I was crazy, didn't want to do a comic. It's okay. It's good. First they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Right? So what do I do in the congressman's office? How did this really sort of gel with everything I do? I do the social media with the congressman. In a sense, I tweet for a living. And it ties very much into what we're trying to do with March. Okay? Everything that's happening in the world today, particularly in the United States, can be tied back to the freedom struggle of the 60s. Particularly in the United States, it can be tied back to the civil rights movement. And yet, at the same time, most of our schools are failing to teach you about the civil rights movement. Thank you. I believe it's a systematic and deliberate effort. You need to understand these principles of nonviolence, of civil disobedience, so that you can stand up and change the status quo as it exists now. If I'm totally frank and totally candid with you, the powers that be are more afraid of you than you are of them. Now, why did I introduce social media with this part? Because that's going to be the key. Right now, we've got a generation, we're all armchair activists, right? We post, we say, I don't like that. Why they do that, that's wrong. But the major breakthrough is going to come when we use social media to organize and to show up. So when we take the principles of nonviolence and how they used it during the civil rights movement, and we use it to organize and put pressure on elected officials and make them change the laws so that our society is more equal and more fair. Where do I think we should start? Student loans. I believe public education in this country should be free. And that's what we're trying to do. We've been talking about this for several years. We've taken it from schoolrooms to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We've gone all over this country, and as you see, it's now becoming an issue in the presidential debate. But that's not enough. We've got to keep pushing. And the reason I think we have to start with student loans is because we need an entire activist generation. Imagine if John Lewis, when he graduated from college at 21 years old, he missed his graduation because he was in jail on the Freedom Rides. Imagine if he had had to go to work after that to pay off his student loans. We would have no Civil Rights Act. We would have no Voting Rights Act. What advances are we missing out on today because we do not have your generation speaking up and speaking out? You name it. There are fundamental reforms in all parts of the spectrum that need to happen. And so I decided we were going to use a comic book to make this happen. No, you can laugh now. That's okay. But it's working. March is being taught in schools now in more than 40 states. It's being used in freshman reading programs at some of the largest universities in this country, whether it's Michigan State, Marquette, Georgia State, University of Illinois, University of Utah, it goes on and on. And we're going around to each one of these schools and we're talking to kids and we're trying to organize. So you can tweet me, you can hit me up on Facebook, you can use my website, whatever. Let me know if I can be helpful. I did not go into public service because I wanted to be a lobbyist someday. I went into public service because I wanted to burn the system down and rebuild it in a more perfect as an image of a more perfect union. Let me tell you one more story, and we'll take some questions. When I was a kid, and I went to high school, I had comic books on my desk. My teacher came up to me, my English teacher, she took them away. She said, "You can't read that, those aren't real books." Well, I went back to my high school with Congressman Lewis and had a wonderful opportunity to have a discussion with that teacher about her experiences teaching our graphic novels. I say that not as any form of comeuppance to the teacher. She was saying what the prevailing wisdom was, and in fact, all of our teachers are doing the Lord's work. They should be getting the Nobel Peace Prize for what they do and putting up with us sometimes. But I say that to speak to the power of an idea whose time has come and the brief time span in which change is possible. So remember that and join us and march. Thank you.
If anyone would like to come and ask the Congressman or Mr. Aydin a question, just come in and form a line. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, if anyone would like to come and ask a question, just step up here to the mic, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I don't have a question. I am some of their English teachers, and I want to thank both of you for reminding us that the message that we give every day comes from our students.
Hi. I guess my question, sorry. Okay, so obviously your decision to write a comic book came from your love of comics, but how do you think the graphic novel affects the message of the book and how it can, for example, like broaden the people reading the book, for like get young people interested in these types of things?
Well, I think a comic book is essentially the new language of our culture. If you're going to read things on the internet, it's words and pictures now, right? Whether you go to BuzzFeed and they have the latest listicle or whatever it is, right? It's words and pictures. A meme is a word and a picture. So I think it becomes increasingly important that we use mediums that are both words and pictures to communicate, because that is now becoming the universal language, not just here in America, but all around the world. And so that's the important part. It also shows you what it looks like rather than through words. I mean, there's a disconnect, right? It makes it real. It makes it plain. Congressman?
Well, when I moved to Atlanta many years ago, when I was 23 years old, and I would go to Martin Luther King Jr. Father's Church, what we call Daddy King, and Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr. would be in the pulpit preaching, and his father would say, "Son, make it plain. Make it plain." He was saying, in effect, make it real. So the comic book has the ability, the capacity to make it real, to dramatize it, and to encourage more young people to read.
Were there any novels or other sources that influenced your graphic novel?
Could you say that again?
Were there any other novels or other sources that influenced your graphic novel?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I've been reading comics my whole life. And so it was things, whether it was, Ex Machina, which is this weird graphic novel for a while, or Pride of Baghdad, which I totally recommend to everybody. Mouse, everybody read Mouse. Persepolis, Fun Home, American Born Chinese. We can go down the list. I mean, these are all, Transmetropolitan is one of my favorites. And then you get into the works of the civil rights movement, whether it's Parting the Waters or, Gandhi's biography or the other comics that the NAACP made. I mean, Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story wasn't the only one. Congressman, do you have favorite books that you read?
Well, many books I read. You mentioned Gandhi, the life of Gandhi. Yeah. Read The Monk that the Pope mentioned, Thomas Merton. How many of you heard the Pope when he addressed Congress? He mentioned Martin Luther King Jr., he mentioned the march from Selma to Montgomery that Dr. King was part of and helped lead. And there's so many books that inspired me as a child. So I was saying we had very few books in our home, but when I went to high school and off to college, I love books. And I would encourage you to read. I had a teacher who said, "Read, my child, read." And I tried to read everything. We were so poor, we had very few books. And even the newspaper. My grandfather had a subscription to the newspaper. We couldn't afford it, but each day when he finished reading his newspaper, we got it and read it. So I said, read. You can watch television, you can listen to the radio, but it's nothing like holding up a book.
When they took away your comic book, right, don't you think that was an act of robbing of an imagination?
I think it was a sad reflection of the prevailing wisdom at the time. And I think one of the great things about the Congressman's teachers and my favorite teachers have been that they've always encouraged us to read anything and everything. And it's been a tremendous honor to be part of this resurgence that makes that mindset that comics aren't real books or that graphic novels aren't real books a relic of the past.
John Lewis. My name is Adonis Valdez from Miami Northern Senior High School, and I am a Viking Freedom Rider. Actually, my teacher, Miss Simonette over there, she's an official Freedom Rider teacher. And I had a question for you. What gave you the courage to stand up against injusticeness?
Well, it's a very good question. I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like the signs. I didn't like being told that you cannot go here. You cannot eat here. I didn't like growing up as a child and go downtown to this little town of Troy to see a movie on a Saturday afternoon. All of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony. And all of the white children went downstairs to the first floor. I didn't like it. So I kept asking and asking. And my mother would say, boy, don't get in trouble. Don't get in the way. That's the way it is. And I think Rosa Parks and Dr. King provided a way out, or maybe even a way in for me. And I made a decision as a very young person that I would try to do everything possible to end that system. And I think we're on our way to creating a better America, because hundreds and thousands and millions of people in America, black and white, Latino and Asian, Native American, have made that decision also. We would get there. We would create one America, and it would serve as a model for the rest of the world.
And one last question, if you don't mind me asking. What words of encouragement do you have for the youth of today?
I would say to young people today, find something that is so dear, so necessary, and try to do something about it. Try to get our fellow human being to be a little more human. Just love everybody. Just respect. Just respect your fellow human being. Don't try to put anyone down because of race, a color, a national origin, a sexual orientation, whatever. We all are human. We got to live like we are human and that we're part of the human family. Just be human.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alize from Miami Northern Senior High. I'm also a Viking Freedom Rider. My question is, what do you feel is the importance of standing up for what you believe is right through no matter how many obstacles of injustice or opposition you go through?
Well, if you believe something is right, that is good and is necessary, you have to stand. Dr. King said if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. You have to be anchored. You heard me say I got arrested a few times. The last time I got arrested, I was October a year ago.
2 years ago now, 2013.
October 2 years ago. And it was at the Capitol in D.C. A member of Congress just cast a vote. 200 citizens from all across America, 8 members of Congress. We wanted the Speaker of the House to bring up comprehensive immigration reform bill, and he wouldn't do it. So we had a protest. And so the Capitol Hill police officer arrested her, and many of them was apologizing. They didn't want to do it because they knew we were right. It doesn't make sense to have hundreds and thousands and millions of people living in our country and not setting them on a path to citizenship.
Hi, I'm sorry, we have time for 2 more questions, okay? And then we have another session. I'm sorry. 2 more questions.
You guys can tweet us or send us emails, and we'll try and get back to every one of you guys, okay?
In your book, there was a lot of references of the word nigger and nigga. They were calling various people that. So my question is, how did you respond during that time period, and how do you think you would respond today if someone were to call you that?
The only reason we use it in the book is to say exactly what happened. We didn't want to sugarcoat anything. We didn't want to sweep anything under the rug in some dark corner. But to say this is what happened. That is real. But I don't think in our society that we should use it. But we put it on those pages. But if someone called me that today, if I'm in a protest or just walk up and say something like that, I just keep walking and not saying anything. I will continue to be peaceful and orderly and walk with a sense of pride and dignity.
Okay. All right, thank you.
My name is Daniela Martinez. I'm from Madder Lakes Academy. And sir, you mentioned that you weren't aware of Congressman Lewis's actions until you started working for him. What is it about the government? What do you think it is about the government that makes it so unappealing to the youth that you have to try harder to get us involved?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, I mean, I think twofold. One, like, the congressman was my congressman, right? So I'm growing up in his district, and I still don't know the full breadth and depth of his story. And I think that is the fault of a systemic and deliberate effort to keep civil rights education out of schools because it's too dangerous to teach kids how to stick up for themselves, right? The second part of that question is why do we need to do outreach to get kids to come into the government? I think, there's this mindset that some have that they want to make government small enough to drown in a bathtub. And I think that has just made government service truly unappealing. And so those of us who do go into government, we have to go in with a thick skin, with some grit and determination. But we need everybody to be involved. I mean, the whole principle of self-governance is that we are all involved. And that starts with the vote. I think the decline in voter turnout has something to do with it. Because that lets smaller groups of people concentrate their power and do whatever they want to do. You look at the midterm election and voter turnout among young people was 26%. That's sinful. When you think about what John Lewis had to do to make sure that each and every one of us has the right to vote, right? And second, I mean, so many ideas start off as radical and become normal. When John Lewis was speaking out of the March on Washington, the provision he was speaking out against was that they wanted to have the requirement to register to vote be that you had a 6th grade education. John Lewis took the radical position that it should be age and residency only. Today we accept that as fact, right? I think we've made it so hard and so difficult for people to move their issue forward because the status quo has money and influence and everything else that it takes a grit, it takes a determination. So the only way to beat that is to find heart. And that's what we're trying to do. We need your heart. We need your spirit. And we need you to get up here and kick some butt.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much. Congressman Lewis and Mr. Aydin will be signing books down the hallway past the elevator bank.
I just want to say thank you. I'm the teacher that asked the first question.
right. No, thank
I
you.
came 2 years ago with my entire school, and they all have questions for you,
Oh, good.
but it doesn't matter.